The smell of stale coffee and burnt sugar clung to the air, a familiar perfume for the 2 a.m. shift. Kira moved through the narrow gaps between tables with an economy of motion born from 1,000 nights, just like this one. Booth 3 needed a refill, Table 7 wanted their check, and the man in the corner booth, the one who had been there for 2 hours nursing a single black coffee, was watching her again. She could feel his gaze on her back, a physical weight. It was different from the usual late-night leers from truckers or college students. It was still, analytical, and utterly unnerving. He didn't belong here. Not in this worn-down, 24-hour diner on the edge of Koreatown. His suit was the first giveaway, a deep charcoal wool that probably cost more than her car, tailored so precisely it seemed molded to the hard lines of his body. Then there was the watch on his wrist, a sliver of silver and black that caught the greasy fluorescent light in a way that spoke of quiet, obscene expense. Everything about him was quiet. He hadn't spoken a word since ordering, just sat with one hand resting on the table, long fingers perfectly still, as if waiting for the world to come to him. Kira grabbed the carafe of coffee, her sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. She told herself he was just some corporate executive working late, maybe lost on his way to a sleeker part of the city. But executives fidgeted. They checked their phones, tapped their pens, looked hurried. This man looked like he had all the time in the world, and that the world had better be on its best behavior for him. She approached his table, forcing a practiced, tired smile onto her face. More coffee? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian chips, lifted from the swirling depths of his cup to her face. They held her there for a beat too long, and the professional smile on her lips felt brittle, thin as ice. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She leaned forward, pouring the steaming liquid. Her focus was on not spilling a drop, on the dark circle widening in his cup. As she pulled the carafe back, his hand, the one that had been so still, moved. It wasn't fast, it wasn't aggressive, but it was unexpected. His fingers brushed the side of the carafe as he reached for a sugar packet. The slight contact was enough. The pot tilted, and a cascade of ice water from the glass she'd set down earlier sloshed over the side of the table, directly onto the front of her apron and the thin cotton of her uniform shirt beneath. The shock of the cold was instant, a gasp of icy wetness against her skin. It was the last straw on a long, exhausting night. Frustration, hot and sharp, flared through her. All she wanted was to finish her shift, go home, and fall into bed. Without thinking, without looking at him, she hissed the words under her breath, a bitter phrase learned from a former roommate during late-night study sessions fueled by convenience store ramen. It was a satisfyingly sharp curse, meant only for herself. Damn it, really crazy bastard. The words were a ghost of a whisper, swallowed by the diner's ambient hum. She reached for a stack of napkins, ready to mop up the mess and move on. A low voice, smooth as polished stone, cut through the noise. Repeat that. Kira froze, napkins clutched in her hand. She slowly lifted her head. He was looking at her, truly looking at her now. The polite disinterest was gone, replaced by an intensity that made the air feel thin. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth, but it held no warmth. It was the smile of a predator that had just seen its prey do something fascinatingly stupid. "This time," he said, his voice dropping even lower, each word deliberate and clear. "Look at me." The diner, with its sticky tables and buzzing lights, seemed to fall away. There was only the man in the charcoal suit and the impossible demand hanging in the air between them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He had heard her. He had understood her. And for some reason, that fact didn't make him angry. It made him interested. Kira had the sickening feeling that his interest was infinitely more dangerous than his anger. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 a.m., and the last of the truckers paid their checks and shuffled out into the pre-dawn gloom. Her manager, a perpetually weary man named Sal, started flipping chairs onto tables. But the man in the corner booth didn't move. Kwon Min-jun, the name he'd given her when Sal had tried to intervene, had paid his bill with $100 bill and waved off the change, but he remained seated, his gaze fixed on Kira. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. He had simply created a bubble of impenetrable silence around his table that no one dared to breach. Sal had tried, puffing out his chest. "Sir, we're closing up." Min-jun had looked at him, a slow, deliberate turn of his head. He said nothing. He just looked. Sal's bravado deflated like a cheap balloon. He'd muttered something about taking out the trash and scurried into the back. Kira was alone with him. "Where did you learn to speak my language?" he asked again. The question was soft, but it landed like a stone. "A friend," she said, her voice tight. She was wiping down the counter, her movements jerky and inefficient. She needed to keep her hands busy, to focus on anything other than the cold weight of his stare. "A college roommate. She taught you curses?" That ghost of a smile returned. "An excellent teacher." It just slipped out.
"I'm sorry."
It was a long night. She risked a glance at him. He was watching her hands, the way she wrung out the rag, the tension in her knuckles. "The phrase you used," he said, ignoring her apology. "A woman I once knew used to say it." His voice changed on the last few words, a subtle shift, like a shadow passing over a placid surface. "She would say it when I did something reckless." She thought it was endearing. Kira stopped wiping. The mention of this other woman felt strangely intimate, a piece of information she had no right to possess. It was a crack in his perfect, cold facade, a glimpse of something human and wounded beneath the steel. This was his wound, she realized with a sudden, chilling certainty. A woman he'd lost. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, her voice softer now. "I know," he replied. And she believed him. He leaned forward slightly, his tailored suit shifting without a wrinkle. "But now you are a complication." Before she could ask what he meant, the night exploded. The squeal of tires on asphalt was the first sound, followed by the percussive crack of the diner's plate glass window shattering inward. Glass sprayed across the checkered floor like diamonds. Kira screamed, dropping to the floor instinctively, her hands flying up to cover her head. Another series of sharp reports followed. Muffled shouts from outside. Min-jun moved with a speed that defied his earlier stillness. In one fluid motion, he was over the table and pulling her behind the relative safety of the steel counter. His body was a solid wall against her back, shielding her. The scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold night air, filled her senses, a strange anchor in the chaos. He drew a gun from a holster she hadn't even suspected was there. It looked like a natural extension of his hand, dark and lethal. He peered over the counter, his expression calm, his eyes narrowed in tactical assessment. There was no panic in him, only a terrible, focused quiet. Through a gap between the syrup dispensers, Kira could see a black sedan parked haphazardly across the entrance, its doors flung open. 2 men were using it for cover, firing towards the diner. A third was trying to move along the side of the building. Min-jun was focused on the 2 in front. He was calculating angles, waiting for his moment. He couldn't see the third man, but Kira could. In the polished chrome of the espresso machine, she saw a distorted reflection, a figure in black, gun raised, creeping towards the side door that led to the kitchen. The door Sal had propped open to take out the trash. He was flanking them. She had a choice. She could stay quiet. She could crawl towards the back exit and run for her life, leaving this terrifying, dangerous man to his fate. It was the sane thing to do. Her survival instinct screamed at her to go. But the image of his face, when he spoke of the other woman, flashed in her mind. The flicker of pain in his otherwise impenetrable eyes. He had shielded her. He had put his body between her and the bullets, without a second's hesitation. She made her choice. "The side," she yelled, her voice raw. "There's another one at the kitchen door." Min-jun's head snapped towards her. His eyes locked on hers for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, something shifted between them. He didn't question her. He trusted her. He pivoted, firing 2 precise shots into the kitchen doorway just as the third gunman burst through. The man crumpled to the floor in a silent heap. The momentary distraction was all the men outside needed. A fresh volley of bullets peppered the front of the counter, chewing through the formica. The immediate danger had passed, but they were still pinned down. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the tinkle of falling glass and Kira's ragged breathing. Minjun moved closer to her, pressing them both into the cramped space behind the counter. The smell of gunpowder was sharp in the air. He put one hand on the wall beside her head, his other still holding the gun, effectively caging her in. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, his control absolute even now. "You saved my life," he said. It wasn't a thank you. It was a statement of fact. A fact that had just changed everything. The space between them crackled with adrenaline and something new, something unnamed and infinitely more complicated than fear. He was no longer just a customer, and she was no longer just a waitress. They were two people who had survived something together, and that had bound them in a way neither of them could have predicted. He couldn't let her go. Kira knew it before he said the words. She had seen their faces. They had seen her with him. Her shouted warning hadn't just saved his life. It had signed her own name onto his death warrant. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He pushed himself to his feet, pulling her up with a firm grip on her arm. The touch was not rough, but it was possessive, an unmistakable claim. The sirens began to wail in the distance, a sound that meant safety for anyone else, but for them, it was just a different kind of threat. He led her through the ruined kitchen, past the body of the man he had shot, and out the back door into a dark, refuse-strewn alley. A sleek black car, different from the one out front, slid to a silent stop beside them. A man in an identical dark suit jumped out and opened the rear door. Minjun pushed her inside before sliding in beside her. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing them in a world of tinted glass and expensive leather. The safe house was a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the sprawling lights of the city. It was a cage made of glass and steel, beautiful and sterile. For 2 days, Kira existed in a state of suspended disbelief. She was given a room with a bed softer than any she had ever slept in and a view that stretched to the ocean, but the door had no handle on the inside. She was a guest. She was a prisoner. Minjun was a constant, silent presence. He would appear with trays of food she had no appetite for, or simply stand in the doorway of her room, watching her. He was trying to figure her out. She was an anomaly in his world of calculated risks and brutal certainties. The first crack in her composure came on the 3rd day. One of his men was escorting her to a different part of the penthouse. Minjun had decided her current room was too exposed when it happened. They were walking down a long hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. As they passed the largest pane of glass, a sound like a giant whip cracking the air split the silence, and a spiderweb of fractures erupted in the glass, right where her head had been a second earlier. The guard shoved her to the ground, shielding her with his body, shouting into a device on his wrist. But Kira barely heard him. She stared at the point of impact, the small, deadly hole in the center of the shattered web. They had found her. They knew where she was. The danger wasn't just near Minjun anymore. It was aimed directly at her. He had almost lost her, and the thought was a cold stone in her stomach. Later that night, they brought a man to the penthouse. He was one of them, one of the Park family soldiers who had been part of the sniper team. They dragged him into the vast living room, his face bruised and defiant, and threw him onto the floor in front of Minjun. Kira stood by the window, wanting to run, but frozen in place. Minjun circled the man, his movements slow and predatory. He asked questions in a low, calm voice, but the man just spat blood on the white marble floor. Minjun's jaw tightened. He looked over at Kira, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He didn't want her to see this part of his world. The captured soldier followed his gaze and sneered at Kira. "Is this the new whore? You kill one woman, you just find another to warm your bed." Something inside Kira snapped. It wasn't just the insult. It was the reference to the woman Minjun had lost, the casual cruelty of it. It was the sniper bullet that had almost taken her life. A cold, clear rage she didn't recognize as her own rose up inside her. On a low glass table nearby sat a heavy, square ashtray. She walked over, picked it up, its weight solid and real in her hand. She didn't brandish it. She just held it. She met Minjun's gaze over the soldier's head. "He knows who gave the order," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Make him talk." The hesitation vanished from Minjun's eyes, replaced by a dark, burning admiration. She had just given him permission. She had crossed a line, stepping from the world of innocent bystanders into his. She hadn't just accepted his violence, she had sanctioned it. Hours later, the apartment was quiet again. The soldier was gone. Kira stood in the same spot, staring out at the city lights, the glass ashtray still on the table beside her. She felt hollowed out, changed in a way she could never undo. She heard Minjun approach, his footsteps silent on the thick rug. He came to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything that had just happened. "You should be afraid of me," he said finally, his voice a low murmur. "I am," she admitted, her gaze still fixed on the distant, glittering lights. She took a breath. "But I think I'm more scared of what happens if you're not here." It was the most honest thing she had ever said. It wasn't love. It wasn't affection. It was a raw, terrifying confession of dependence, a bond forged in gunpowder and fear. He turned his head, his profile sharp and severe against the city skyline. He didn't say anything, but she felt the weight of his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the truth she had just spoken aloud. The information they'd extracted from the soldier was chilling. The Park family, led by a ruthless man named Park Jinwoo, had changed their strategy. They knew Minjun was untouchable when he was prepared, so they were going after his weakness. His new weakness. He showed her the photo on his phone. It was a picture of her older sister, Chloe, laughing as she walked out of a grocery store, blissfully unaware of the long-range lens capturing her image. A wave of nausea and white-hot fury washed over Kira. They had brought her family into this. They had made this personal. Minjun's plan was swift and brutal, a full-scale assault on the Park family's central compound, a restaurant they used as a front. He intended to cut the head off the snake. He told Kira she would remain in the penthouse, protected by his most trusted men. "No," she said, the word flat and absolute. He turned to her, his brow furrowed. "This is not a negotiation." "Park Jinwoo," she said, her mind racing, connecting dots she hadn't even realized were there. "He came into the diner once about a month ago, with a group of his men. They were loud, arrogant." She remembered the order. She remembered the fuss he had made. "He has a severe shellfish allergy. Anaphylactic." His lieutenant had to inspect the kitchen to make sure there was no cross-contamination. Minjun stared at her, his mind clearly working, seeing the possibilities. "There's a private event there tonight," Kira continued, her voice gaining strength. "A meeting of his top people. They'll have outside caterers. I can get in. I can be the distraction you need." "Absolutely not," he shot back, his voice like iron. "It's too dangerous. I will not risk you." "You're not risking me," she countered, stepping closer to him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You're using an asset. This is my fight now, too. They went after my sister. I'm not going to hide in a glass tower while you fight it for me." He searched her face, seeing the unbending resolve there, the same fire he'd seen in the diner when she'd warned him. He saw a partner, not a liability. The muscle in his jaw worked for a long moment before he gave a sharp, reluctant nod.
"Fine."
"But you do not go in alone. I go with you." He looked at her then, and the cold mask of the Mafia boss fell away for a single, breathtaking second. "If anything happens to you, Kira," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed, "none of this matters. The territory, the power, it's all dust." The plan was audacious. Kira, dressed in the crisp black and white uniform of a catering server, pushed a trolley of champagne flutes through the bustling kitchen of Park Jinwoo's restaurant. Minjun was behind her, dressed as a kitchen porter, his face shadowed by a baseball cap. The air was thick with the smells of garlic and roasting meat, and the clang of pots and pans was a frantic drumbeat beneath the thrum of her own pulse. In her pocket, she carried a small, sealed vial of concentrated shrimp extract. They moved into the main dining hall. Park Jin-woo sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his lieutenants, laughing at some crude joke. Kira's hands were steady as she began placing glasses on the table. She moved with the practiced ease of a professional, making herself invisible. She reached Park's place setting, her heart hammering. As she set down his glass, her other hand, hidden by the tray, deftly uncapped the vial and tipped its contents into the water pitcher at his elbow. A few drops were all it would take. She finished her round and retreated towards the wall, finding a spot near Minjun, who was pretending to clear a nearby table. The wait was agonizing. Then it happened. Park poured himself some water. He took a long drink. For a moment, nothing. Then his eyes widened. He clawed at his throat, his face turning a blotchy red. He made a horrible, gagging sound as he tried to stand, knocking his chair over. Chaos erupted. His men surged to their feet, shouting for a medic. This was the signal. Minjun's men, who had entered from the front and back, moved in. The sounds of suppressed gunfire were like sharp, deadly coughs in the pandemonium. But Park, even in the throes of anaphylactic shock, was a cornered animal. His eyes, swollen and wild, found Kira. He recognized her. From the diner. He knew. With a final, desperate burst of strength, he lunged, not for a weapon, but for her. He grabbed her, pulling her in front of him as a shield, a knife appearing in his hand, its cold edge pressing against her throat. Kira didn't scream. Her mind was a flash of pure, cold clarity. She could smell the sour scent of his panic. "They know about the Cayman accounts, Jin-woo," she whispered. The words meant only for him, a bluff born from a half-heard snippet of conversation at the diner. "Your people are already talking." It was enough. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering with doubt. That was all the opening Minjun needed. He moved, a blur of deadly grace. He shoved Park away from her, taking the desperate slash of the knife across his own forearm to create the space. Blood, dark and stark, soaked the sleeve of his white shirt. He didn't even flinch. His men descended, and it was over. Back in the silent penthouse, the war was won. The city glittered below, oblivious. Minjun stood by the window, his back to her. A clean, white bandage was wrapped tightly around his forearm, a stark contrast to his dark suit. The cost had been paid. Kira walked to him, stopping just behind him. She didn't speak. She didn't touch him. Her presence was enough. She could have been miles away by now, starting a new life under police protection, erasing this entire bloody chapter. The choice to run had been there, a bright, shining door. But she had let it close. She had stayed. He saw her reflection in the dark glass, standing behind him, a permanent fixture in his violent world. He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers in the window. He didn't ask if she was staying. He didn't need to. The question had been answered in a grimy diner, with a quiet curse whispered under her breath. She wasn't his prisoner, not anymore. She was the one part of his empire he had never conquered, the one piece that had been freely given. And in his world of debts and blood, that made her the most powerful thing he had ever known.